The question is that the motion be agreed. James Shaw.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I beg your pardon, Mr. Speaker. I was anticipating that Mr. Bishop would actually continue. It was a riveting speech. Mr. Speaker, the Green Party is continuing to support this bill, the Taxation, Business Tax Exchange of Information and Remedial Matters Bill through the House and through to the next stages. And I just want to say that I think that there are very few times in opposition, when you can campaign on something for years and years and years, and you think that all of that campaigning is falling on deaf ears, and then suddenly it all happens. And so there are two considerable wins for us, things that we've been campaigning on since 2011, actually, in this bill that I just wanted to draw attention to. One is, as referenced by Mr. Bishop, the tax simplification for SMEs. And I'm not going to suggest that anybody has stolen the policy that we ran on first in the year 2011, but it is clearly one of those emergent good ideas that a number of parties across the House came to over the course of a few years and has finally made its way into legislation. As a former small business person myself, I think that the idea of a pay-as-you-go system is, frankly, one of those things that is going to make life a whole lot easier for small businesses in New Zealand. And I'm really looking forward to seeing this in action, because it is, of all of the things that you run up against as a small business, how to handle the cash flow implications of the existing system is an absolute pain in the neck, and it's a huge barrier to business, and most business people just want to get on with doing their work. They don't want to have to be handling that cash flow management system, and so the pay-as-you-go option, I think, is a significant breakthrough. So, as someone who stood on a campaign platform in 2011 and then again 2014 on that, I'm really delighted to see this move closer into law. I just want to draw one, in relation to that part of the bill, Mr. Speaker. One of the submissions did point out that there may be an incentive in relation to changes around the fringe benefit tax to motor vehicles for sole traders, which may produce unintended consequences, and that is that you may see a great deal of investment in very valuable motor vehicles by sole traders in order to take advantage of that particular tax break into sort of larger and more recent models. And so I think that is something that is a concern and that we need to monitor, because I noticed that submission comment hasn't made it through to any changes in the legislation. So that is something that we want to keep an eye out as it takes effect over the course of the next 12 to 24 months. The second significant win, and this is really the main part of the bill, and other speakers, of course, have talked about this tonight, Mr. Speaker, is in relation to the part of the bill that is around disclosure of foreign trusts and how we manage that. And again, I just wanted to say that for the Green Party, this is a very significant part of the bill, because as early as 2012, my former colleague and predecessor, Dr. Russell Norman, had been campaigning strongly on the need to improve the disclosure regime around foreign trusts in New Zealand, because he was concerned then about the potential for damage to New Zealand's international reputation and the idea that New Zealand may be being exploited as a sort of an in effect tax haven as a result of our weak disclosure rules. That was, of course, confirmed by Inland Revenue, which had approached the government in 2012 on a number of occasions to try and get the government to pay attention to this, and were rebuffed. They, of course, had another go in 2013 and again in 2014, and on each occasion the government essentially wasn't really interested in doing anything about that. And I really want to give a shout out to the media on this, because the fact that the Green Party had been raising this issue in Parliament and been asking questions in the House and so on, we'd been sort of working on this, but it wasn't really until the media and some great investigative journalism actually managed to blow this issue open earlier this year, in April of this year, that the government finally bent to pressure in the face of having front-page headlines about, the then Prime Minister John Key's personal lawyer and the connections of lobbyists and the ability of industry lobbyists to have a conversation with a minister and get a meeting and have a review buried, those stories really did lead to the Shewan Review, and then the Shewan Review, of course, found many of the proposals that we'd been suggesting for several years, that those were quite sensible changes to our foreign disclosure rules, foreign trust disclosure rules, and those have formed the backbone of what's in this bill. So we think it is significant. The other thing that I just wanted to draw attention to, that's been referenced by a couple of the earlier speakers, particularly David Clark, he mentioned that one of the things that hasn't made it into this bill is in relation to bringing in phase 2 of the anti-money laundering, regulations in relation to the housing crisis, because the government has constantly said, look, we don't need to worry about foreign investment in the New Zealand. I've got 10 minutes, buddy. And he gets to wave his hand, not you, not yet anyway. Is that the problem that we've got is, the government keeps saying that, look, only 3% of transactions in the New Zealand housing market are foreign transactions, right? And we therefore don't need to worry about it as a problem. But I just want to say is that it is not the number of transactions, it's the amount of money behind them that makes the difference. So when you've got an inflated market like our own, where there is a supply problem, even having a tiny number of transactions around the edge of that, where the amount of money behind those, in a world where you've had, huge amounts of, inflationary money from quantitative easing in the United States and in Europe, and the massive growth in capital in China, huge amount of hot money coming out of China, which is looking for a safe haven to park, is that, I think our housing market is valued at something like $70 billion, $700 billion, it's a lot of money anyway. Let's just say it's a great deal of money. Is that when we're trading with each other, that there is less of a problem there. But if you've got a small number of transactions who have got an effectively infinite amount of cash behind them, then that has a massive inflationary impact on an already overheated market. And so the impact, even if it's a very small number of transactions, the impact of money laundering through the New Zealand housing market is actually significant in terms of the price effect that can have on our market. And so any attempt to put some sunlight onto that problem, Mr. Speaker, through this bill, I think we need to really support strongly. I do want to raise another concern of one of the submitters, which is that the regime that's been put in place here is very complex, and that the burden of compliance, therefore, is probably going to be quite high. And the concern of that submission was that if that is true, there is a real danger that the low risk, the clean operators, if you like, the people who are entirely legitimate in terms of the nature of the business that they're doing through using these trust vehicles, is that they will simply depart because the burden of compliance is too high and their threshold for risk is low, right? Because they're clean operators. They like to keep their noses clean. That's why they've got a low burden of risk. But the people who have got a higher risk threshold, who are chances, who maybe are actually using our foreign trust regime as for dodgy purposes, that they may be tempted to stay. Because they will sort of say, okay, well, we will try to dodge, or ignore some of these regulations. And so, in fact, the concern of that submission is that the legislation may, in fact, have the opposite effect from that which is intended. So I think it's really incumbent upon us, Mr. Speaker, as this new disclosure regime comes into effect over the next 12 to 24 months, that we maintain absolute vigilance and that we really watch the sector closely to see what actually happens as a result of these legislative changes, because it may be that we need to revisit it and make sure that it does what it intends to do. And it is a very complex piece of legislation. You do need to be a tax lawyer with some years' experience to really comprehend it. And of course that is a real concern. Is that there may be some real opportunities for avoidance because of the complexities here. Having said all of that, Mr. Speaker, we do obviously think it's an important piece of legislation and recommend it to the House.